Troy Larson is the longtime executive director of the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System, a project meant to bring water via pipeline to communities across southeast South Dakota, southwestern Minnesota, and northwest Iowa. Also for years, Larson has been fighting with the federal government to get them to pay their fair share of this project. A few months ago, in their initial budget plan, the Trump White House had set aside only $100,000 for Lewis and Clark. But that number may be on the verge of a significant increase. When your project involves the economic futures of communities in 3 states and has over $185 million in costs for completion, seeing $100,000 in a proposed federal budget is mind-boggling.
You're just dumbfounded, you're speechless. How in the world could the administration think that $100,000 would be able to put any pipe in the ground whatsoever? So no, it's just shock. It was just shaking your head in bewilderment. So it was just really strange.
Troy Larson is the executive director of the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System, and he tells me what he has been hoping for in recent years is an attitude from Washington of making sure this project crosses the finish line in a timely fashion.
We are 75% completed, so you think the closer we get to the end, there might be more momentum to, hey, let's just finish this once and for all.
18 years ago, the federal government agreed to fund 80% of the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System. The remaining 20% would be split between states and local entities. Now, 18 years later, the states and local entities have paid 100% of their costs. The federal government still has to pay 45% of its, roughly $188 million.
There's such a critical need for the water in terms of quality of life, economic development. Receiving $100,000 in terms of the administration's proposed budget for FY19 just makes no sense whatsoever.
In recent years, federal funding levels have been inconsistent and thus tough for Lewis and Clark to know what they can dependably plan on in terms of water pipeline construction. In fiscal year 2011, the feds only kicked in $2 million, but that has been on the rise every year since. $5.5 million in fiscal year 2012, $9 million in fiscal year 2015, $15 million in fiscal year 2018. So then what explains the $100,000 proposal for fiscal year 2019?
I think we're a victim of our own success in some ways in that we have such strong support from our tri-state delegation that the administration knows whatever number they put in for Lewis and Clark, the tri-state delegation is going to go to bat to try to increase it. So I think that's part of the mentality too, because it wasn't just Lewis and Clark. The overall funding for the rural water program from the administration was cut from $26 million in FY18 to just over $13 million in the 2019 proposed budget.
Having the political backing of congressional leaders from 3 states can get results. That $100,000 set aside for Lewis and Clark was part of a proposed $13 million allocation for rural water projects nationwide. When this proposal made its way into the U.S. House, Larson says something unexpected happened.
That the House approved an additional $98 million on top of that 13. About a week later, we got news from the Senate that they only approved $86 million, so a reduction of $12 million. That was a big surprise to us because normally the Senate number comes in a little higher, if not the same.
But it is at this moment when some Washington accounting came into play, courtesy of Senator John Thune, who Larson says asked his fellow senators to move $13 million in funding from a dormant Army Corps project into the account for rural water systems.
And that Thune amendment passed the floor of the Senate, so now the Senate number, instead of $86 million, is $99.5. And again, the House is $98. So they're very close, with the Senate being a little higher.
So the total federal budget for rural water programs is likely to be right around $111 million. And Troy Larson says it is his belief that for a second year in a row, Lewis and Clark will receive $15 million in federal dollars to push this project forward.
That helps us to make some significant progress, absolutely. The remaining federal cost share is about $188 million. So $15 million still is going to take us a while to finish the project. But it's certainly a lot better than the $7, $8, $9 million that we've been getting in past years. So we're really sitting in a good position. But again, we won't know until probably the first part of next year what our final number will be.
And of course, we'll be staying in touch with Troy Larson to see what the final amount ends up being in this year's budget for the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System. We will be back in just a moment. Keep it right here. You're watching This Week in Politics on KSFY.